This little piggy went to the market. This little piggy had roast beef. This little piggy had none. And this little piggy went wee, wee, wee all the way home. Now hopefully you know what the heck I'm talking about, otherwise I probably look like a fool. And if you don't, well, just pull off your shoes and we'll get down to business. But I can remember being a very, very young boy and playing this nursery rhyme game. And, I had the opportunity, which many did not. I got to meet my great-grandmother. And Roger, he doesn't even know his own grandparents, much less his great ones. But thankfully, mine love him, and they accept him as their own. And you can never underestimate that kind of love. Grandparents are special, especially our grandmas. When my great-grandma Smith died, she left me the most beautiful pig brooch. And as a kid, I remember being so tickled with it because I wasn't very old when she died. And I remember I loved Charlotte's Web, and I loved that little piggy that she gave me. And it didn't remind me of sadness. It reminded me of her. But because I was young, sometimes I had a hard time remembering my memories as clearly as I wanted to. And because there was few, I cherished them so much. I love those memories. So whenever I wanted to remember her, I would just pull out that pig and I'd look at it real good again. And I would hold it tight in my hand and I would close my eyes and I'd imagine myself, holding his ears real tight, riding on its piggybacking all the way to Grandma's house. And I'd be transported there every time. I would be back at her white wooded country home. I can see it. I can smell it. All of those interesting things that were inside, golded, beaded spoons on the wall, knitted tissue boxes, fancy floral cups, a crystal sugar bowl, and I'd never seen a butter dish before. And the smell of homemade sweet potato pie tugging you into a delightful nap. Oh, that brooch was like magic, and every time I held that pig in my hands, I went wee, wee, wee all the way to her home. When I held it, that coolness of it, it would remind me of her porch, and that silver bowl that I held in my lap, it was still brisk from the cold morning. And we would bring in the sunrise, snapping beans from her field, while the squeaks of our rockers flirted with the morning crickets. Oh, little piggy was like magic to me. And when I held it, it was my piggyback ride to Grandma's. It was what took me there again. Now along the way, I'm sad to say that I lost that little piggy. And when I realized it, I remember feeling like a hampering sorrow, like a boy looking for his lost ticket outside the circus. I'd lost the keys to my time machine. Now how in the world would I get to Grandma's without my little piggy? Do you have anything like that? Some item that means so much to you? Something that you can touch, that you can hold, that you can smell, that you can see or even hear? Some tangible reminder of someone that you love dearly. Maybe it's a ring. Maybe it's a cute salt and pepper shaker, maybe a handwritten note, a saved voicemail, a ticket stub, something you cherish for the very same reason I did my little piggy. Having it takes you back to that place, to their arms, and into their presence. You get a piggyback ride in time. One of the things that I love and cherish most is my mama's purse. And I love that it's got her used tissues in it and her used chapstick and all her stuff. I love that purse. And I was going to bring it today, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I was afraid that something would happen to it, which once you hear this message is ironically the point. But one of the other things that I have saved from my late partner Alan is this. No, it's not a garter belt. We lost those in the move. But it's an elastic sheet holder, and it would hold our sheets in place. And I love that I have a piece of the place that we slept in for so many years. And just like it held the sheets, somehow it holds my memories in place. It fastens them in my mind. So you think about it. What is it that you hold on to? What is it that you need to feel close to that someone? What is it? What is it that you need? I mean, sometimes that someone, it could be anybody in your life. Sometimes it's even the people who are still alive we do this for, right? Sometimes it's a breakup, or a lost love, or a child who's moved away. I mean, there's so many things. We have a tendency, to be sentimental pack rats because we are God's people who love. We have a tendency to connect the fruits of the Spirit with something that we can hold, touch, or see. Love that over there. We want to be able to touch the tree because the fruits themselves are so elusive. It's that love, that joy, that peace. You see, we know if we want to experience joy, we know the people that we can go to in order to experience that. If we want peace, we know the places that we can go in order to feel it. Those places, those things that you go to and that you hold on to are somehow a recipe for encounter. Worldly things that we piggyback ride on to get to a spiritual place. Why do we do this? Why? We do it because we know this recipe of encounter, it works every time. We do it because we feel like something is so important that we don't want to lose connection with it. And that when it is indeed something that is seeable and touchable and able to be held in our hands, that somehow it's more knowable and real and true. I can touch it. It alleviates our fears of losing that connection. I mean, it feels like it can't be taken from you because you have tucked it away safe and because you own it. Possession may be 9/10 of the law of man, but never the law of God. And what about God? What is it that takes you to Him? What is it that you piggyback right on into His presence? What is it? I mean, is it this cross behind me? I mean, is it a rosary in your hand? Is it music? Is it hymns of old? Is it the delicate pages of our Bibles? Is that it? How do you connect with God? What's your recipe for encounter? Is it this place? Is it these people here? Is it Mount Calvary? Is it me? Are you piggybacking on me to get to God? No wonder my dang back hurts so much. I need a spiritual chiropractor up in here. But here's the thing. Whatever your recipe for encounter is, the reason we cling to it so much is because it works. It works. It takes us into His presence. There is a certainty in it that we can rely on and that we can depend on. Keyword being, depend on. The more we piggyback on places and things, the more we need those things in order to get there. And that can be risky. You see, if you need the recipe to have the encounter, what happens when you no longer have all the ingredients? Are we setting ourselves up for disappointment and heartache? Ironically, the same tangible things that give you such comfort, those touchable things that make you feel more secure just by having them, are in actuality the very reason that they can in turn be taken from you. When you connect a spiritual or emotional encounter with something of this world, you will find yourself left holding the bag every time, an empty bag. What happens when you lose that little piggy? What happens when you leave your cake out in the rain? What happens when your recipe for encounter is gone? What happens? Not if, but when that which is holdable is lost, stolen, or crumbles. Here, piggy, piggy, piggy. Then what? Then what? See if we can find some wisdom in the Word for us today. Last week, if you were here, Michaela gave a spirited sermon about young King David, the forgotten boy shepherd now chosen by God, and how the oil that flowed on him and how he walked in it. I can't do it justice. I love me some Michaela. It was so good. But it sticks with me. It sticks with me. But King David, he was a man after God's own heart. just like she said. And he was a great military leader. He was a great commander. And King David, he united all the 12 tribes of Israel. He extended their boundaries. They had more pieces of the promised land than ever before. Now David, he ruled as king for 40 years, and the nation very much prospered. But one day, David was sitting on his throne, and he got to look around and says, hey, here I am, this visible king, and I'm sitting on this fancy throne made of cedar and all these luxurious stones, when the invisible King of Kings lives out in that little bitty old raggedy old tent. Well, that ain't right. That don't seem right to me. Surely God must want what I want as king. And so he asked the prophet Nathan, hey, can I build this big old fancy temple to put God in? And Nathan says, well, sure, I don't see why not. And so David, he gets all excited. He's like, oh, I'm going to build the biggest house for you, God. And so he starts making plans, and he buys a threshing floor site for them to build on. But much like the Temple of Babel, God looked down and said, I don't need that fancy house. I am a God of the people, for I move and go where my children go. Now, I've been camping out with you for 500 years, and not once have I said, will you build me a fancy castle? Not once, David. So you think you're going to build me a house? I don't think so. I'm going to build you a house. The house of David, where the Messiah, my very son, will descend from. I don't need that temple. I'm sending you one. The one. But don't worry, David. Nonetheless, y'all still build a temple. It's just your son that's going to do it. Now, David, at this point, he could have been crushed. You know what it's like. Like whenever you really want to do something really bad, you've been working on it, and then God comes along and says, no. That's not my will. Stop doing that. And sometimes we think, oh, but God, I'm doing this for you. It's when I build, it's when I'm creating that I find you. That's when I'm able to really connect with you. I have to build this. But I guess you have other plans for me. If God's ever pulled the plug on something you were doing, on something really special, then you know how it can feel, especially if you put a lot of time and effort into it. You can feel deflated, discouraged, lost without this plan that you've conjured up. You see, when we are sure of the thing that we are doing, we feel close to God, like our purpose is somehow validated by Him. But when He says no, it's when we start to lose that connection with Him, because we just feel like so off the mark from what He wanted in the first place. Like, how did I get it so wrong? And then there's a hiccup in our faith when that happens, because we mistook the works that we do with our connection to Him. You see, David's desire to build a temple was his way of ultimate connection to God. It's going to build up and reach Him and house Him. But it was when he was shepherding or slingshotting or battling that when he felt most close to God, because he knew He was with him. It was in David's works that he found God. Much like David, we connect with God through our works. We really do. And through things we build, things that we can touch, things that we can see. So David, he could feel the way that we feel when God pulls a rug out from underneath us. But no, he says, no. Okay, God, it's not me. I'm not going to build a temple. Okay, I'm fine with that. My son's going to do it. All right. I may not be able to build it, but I can do everything that I can to prepare him to do it. So David, rather than feeling redirected, rather than feeling dejected, he feels redirected in his sense. He begins to work. Like that. When God pulls the rug out from underneath something, maybe it has recently with you, you just redirect and do something else with that same passion and with that same gusto, because plans change and we need to accept that if we want to move forward in them. So he begins to store up. David, he starts, for years, the rest of his life, lots of large amounts of iron and gold and bronze and cedar. And he drew up the plans for this magnificent temple so that he could give it to his son one day. So David's son Solomon is born. He grows up and he receives all the plans, and he starts to work with neighboring nations. He starts to begin to build this temple that his father, King David, instructed him to build. This is astounding, y'all. The Bible tells us that Solomon employed 30,000 people in 3 shifts of 10,000 at a time. There was a staggering 80,000 other people quarrying stone, and another 70,000 people were employed just to carry it to the site. Oh, did I mention the other 3,300 supervisors? I mean, that's a total of 183,300 people working for 7 years to build this magnificent temple. God, but human resources was a nightmare. I used to work in an office. It was a nightmare. So the temple, it gets completed, right? They build it. They finally get it done. 7 years goes by. And they said, okay, we're going to have this huge ceremony. Invite everybody. Come on, all of Israel. So everybody comes. Everybody was there. And they sacrificed, the word says, so many sheep and cattle that they couldn't even count how many. And there's kind of this moment of truth that I think most people might just skim over as part of the story. And Solomon kind of has an inkling because he says, wow, like, God, not even the highest of heaven can contain you. How much less will this temple that I've built? I don't know. Will you live here? Will you live here, God? I don't even know. I've done all this work. We don't even know if you'll come. And so they bring the Ark of the Covenant in. They bring it in, and Solomon, as they bring it in, like Solomon's there, and all the high priests in there, and they just kind of hold their breath. All this work, all this planning, all this hoping. Now, would God live there? So after the priests, they put it down. They kind of withdraw from the holy place, and they back out. And suddenly, a thick cloud, it fills the temple. So much so that the priests had to stop what they were doing because they just couldn't see what they were doing. And Solomon says, it's God. It's God. God is here. His glory has come upon us, the word says. And Solomon says, since Moses, God has dwelled in the cloud, and I have indeed built a magnificent temple for you, a place for you to dwell forever, God. It was a magnificent place, and God would live there. But Solomon screwed up with one word: forever. God forever contained in something man-made. Does that sound right to you? But look, the temple was amazing, and yes, God chose to live there. The cloud was there. It served God and the people for many years. In truth, it was beautiful. It was an effective recipe of encounter, and the people found God there time and time again. But over time, the people got confused. They began to confuse God with the temple itself. People forgot the reason for the divine encounter was not the temple, but it was God's presence in the dark cloud that just so happened to live in the temple for the time. But God would not dwell there forever. God cannot be contained. He is powerful. In a nation that despised other gods, the ark itself, it was an unknowable, uncontainable God, a God who chose to camp out with the people, to go and be a part of them, whatever that may be. My gosh, it's the same then it is now. All God really wants from us is for Him to be a part of us and for us to take Him, right? Absolutely. Now, the God who camps out with the people is tied up and locked away in a golden temple. You see, the building of the temple, it reflects that human desire that we still have to contain God, to want to be able to experience Him in very set and fixed ways and places. Like us, those Israelites began to depend on the recipe of encounter, depending on the things that could be seen, touched, tasted, smelled, and held. But God is not in those things. He is in the cloud. And I can't hold the cloud. I don't know about you. Can you? No, you can't. The temple is built to help the people worship, yet it moves God farther away from them. The God who camped out with and went to battle with the people now is in the place called the Holy of Holies, the innermost part of the temple, to where only some priests can go into. And that's only one time a year. How unavailable they made God to be. How sometimes the churches and temples of today make God so unavailable to the people. That is not a God. God is a God who's been able to be reached. God is a God that you can walk up to. A God that you can love. A God that you can feel. Not a God in a box. That's not God. The people depended on it to be able to experience God. The temple was the piggyback ride into His presence. So the temple stood like an enormous, habitable golden calf filled with its worshipers of it. But any way you melt it, it ain't God. You see, today we've fallen into some same trap that Solomon and the people fell into. We've come to confuse the very presence of God, with the very things that take us to Him. You see, this recipe for encounter that we call church, it's effective. And yes, God is here. This recipe works, which is why we hold it close. But what happens if this place ceases to exist? What happens when all the touchable things and places that you use to connect to God are taken away from you? What happens if this church crumbles to the ground? It's been 12 years and it hasn't now, so why would it, we might think? Think it can't happen? Even that great temple with all those people that was built was decimated more than once, just like Jesus said it would be. Now, they didn't think it would ever fall either. But what do you think it did to their faith when it did? What would losing this place do to yours? Would it affect your ability to experience God? Would you feel templeless? Would you still be able to connect with Him in the way that you need? So what do we do? What do we do? How do we fix that, can we? How do we safeguard ourselves against crumbling temples? The answer lies in our third reading that was read, 1 Peter 2. As you come into the presence of Jesus, He is the cornerstone, first and foremost. But you are a part of Him. Like Him, you are living stones. And you, my friend, are being built into a temple, a mighty spiritual house. Mighty. One that can't be touched, one that cannot be torn down. You are the living stones, for you are the temple, the word says. I'm the temple? Oh, wait a minute, the dark cloud, it's in me? There's your answer. There's your answer. If you want to worship and speak to God in the purest and the surest of way, then you must access Him not through this temple, but through this one. Through this one. That's where your encounter must emanate from. Now, I'm not saying, I want you leaving here saying, I went to that church, they told me to throw my crosses and my Bibles out. Told me I didn't need to come anymore. That's not what I'm saying. That ain't what I'm saying. The board's like, what? What are you talking about? But, you don't need to throw out your recipes for encounter. Don't throw them out because they work. God is saying, go. I want you to go. Your works, they please me. I want you to build them. I want you to find me in them, yes. But do not forget, my child, I am not the works, nor can I be confined to what your little bitty hands can make. My spirit is mysterious, and it can never be held, for it blows like the wind. You can still use your recipes, but you sure enough better know how to cook without them. Here's the thing. You don't need worldly things to get you to a spiritual place, nor do you need worldly things to relive your memories, because they are, in fact, spiritual. Your relationship and memories mean more than anything you could ever hold, or save, or carry in your purse, or anything that you could hang. You see, these things don't hold memories. They don't hold memories. You do. Your heart does. These things are not presents. You are that presence. You are. It is you. You don't need a recipe because you are the recipe. You are a living stone that piggyback rides on the Holy Spirit into God's presence every time that you enter into the doors of your temple. Every time. And when you realize that, no one and nothing can take that from you. You see, I don't need this to go to Alan. I don't need my mama's purse to get to my mama. And I don't need a piggy to get to grandma's. And just like I don't need this physical cross to get to God. And neither do you. When it comes to Him, no piggyback rides are needed because you're already there. Amen.